Hello, neighbor. You are now watching Prophetic News in Focus. In current times, the world is witnessing first-hand dramatic accounts of Bible prophecy being fulfilled at an alarming rate, bringing the return of Jesus Christ nearer every day. This week, Prophetic News in Focus presents a prophecy update. In today's broadcast, we will explore the scriptural passages that reveal these truths to a searching generation. Welcome to another broadcast of Prophetic News in Focus. In this week's headlines,
3 IDF soldiers were killed today in operational activity in southern Gaza Strip. The Maglan IDF elite unit operated in Gaza in order to uncover offensive tunnels and indeed uncovered a tunnel opening inside a house in the southern Gaza Strip. 2 explosive devices were detonated against the soldiers, one from within the tunnel and a second one that was concealed within the house. The explosion caused the residents to collapse. Yesterday, an IDF joint operation found another terror tunnel, this time on the floor of a mosque.
אנחנו מסתכלים על מסגד, בקושי רואים את הקריירה שבו הייתה לחימה לפני כ4 שעות. בתוך המסגד מצאו שני פתחי טילים, אחד חשוד כהגנתי ואחד חשוד כהתקפי. אנחנו נכנסים עכשיו לקומה התחתונה במסגד. זה פתח הפיר הראשי, ההתקפי, שכנראה המסילה שמובילה לשטח מדינה. כאן יש פתח פיר שמתבצע על ידי זרע.
לפני כ4 שעות בלחימה שהייתה כאן, מחבלים ברחו דרך הפיר ההגנתי הזה, כנראה שפתח היציאה שלו בהמשך השכונה.
The extent of the tunnel is revealed by aerial footage of its demolition.
בעוד מספר קטנות התבצע פיצוץ של מנהרת תקיפה שנחפרה מתוך מסגד במשך 10 חודשים על ידי החמאס, ולא בכוונה לפגוע בחיילים ובאזרחים חפים מפשע. במהלך מבצע זה נהרגו 3 מטובי בנינו בקרבות עזים עם מחבלים. פיצוץ זהו לזכרם, והמסר לחמאס הוא חד וברור: 4, 3, 2, 1.
And here's a glimpse into the counter-terror activity. Here's first-person footage from the field of IDF Special Forces storming a terrorist building in Sajaiya. They seize a stockpile of weapons and uncover a tunnel opening.
כמו שאתם רואים פה, יש פה מסדרון של בית. יש פה תמונה של הקוראן, אני חושב, וליד זה כיתוב בערבית של חוטי חשמל שהולכים על הקיר לאורך כל הבית דרך המשקופים.
מצאנו 4 משקי צלופים, זה רימון. אנחנו פה רגע ממשיכים לבדוק.
And here's yet another activity against the tunnels that still are the main objectives of this operation. The troops are continuing to eliminate Hamas's tunnels from Gaza leading into Israel, used of course to murder or kidnap Israelis.
מחיר מבצעי, נועד להכניס מחבלים לדרום הארץ. אפשר להיכנס פה כמות גדולה מאוד של מחבלים, להכניס פה הרבה מאוד אספקה, נמצא בחצר של בית, בתוך פחון.
Knesset member Zev Elkin from the Likud slammed the whole idea of ceasefires that we're seeing every day throughout the operation, saying that these ceasefires cause damage to Israel. All this walking towards these humanitarian ceasefires or not is a big mistake, Elkin said. Last weekend we were already in a state that Hamas was on the verge of breaking. We saw large groups of Hamas members who turned themselves in, and it happened because we attacked them without stopping. The rule against terrorism is that you do not pursue terrorism. Terrorists will pursue you, Elkin added. Therefore, this method of humanitarian ceasefire breaks, even if they come under international pressure, is problematic. Hamas exploits these ceasefires to organize itself and to continue its attacks. According to Elkin, investigations into the handling of incidents in Gaza must wait until after the operation ends. Deputy Foreign Minister, Knesset member Tzachi Hanegbi referred to the tunnel terror attacks and said that this is not a new threat in terms of the Israeli leadership. The tunnel threat was well known, even publicly. The proof is the Gilad Shalit abduction. Since then, there were hundreds of Israeli actions against the tunnels. Intelligence was abundant, the leaders knew, and the result acted. We will soon witness a significant period, years and years of quiet in the south. A protest was held last night near the Kiryat, the main government offices and army base in central Israel in Tel Aviv. Members of the Chosen Leumi, or National Steadfastness Organization, protested against the policy which they claim is restricting and limiting the army's activities in the Gaza Strip. The activists called on the Prime Minister and the Cabinet not to take the advice of President Obama and UN Secretary General to reach a ceasefire, rather to bring an end to the Gaza-based terror. Prime Minister, you have to destroy the Hamas, activists called. We hope that our warriors did not fall in vain. If you stop the fighting now, how will you be able to look the families in their eyes? This is opportunity to destroy Hamas, explained one of the organizers.
Secretary General Ban Ki-moon and United States Secretary of State John Kerry announced that the United Nations representative in Jerusalem, Special Coordinator Robert Seri, has received assurances that all parties have agreed to an unconditional humanitarian ceasefire in Gaza. This humanitarian ceasefire will commence at 8 a.m. local time on Friday, August 1st, 2014. It will last for a period of 72 hours unless extended. During this time, the forces on the ground will remain in place. We urge all parties to act with restraint until this humanitarian ceasefire begins and to fully abide by their commitments during the ceasefire. This ceasefire is critical to giving innocent civilians a much-needed reprieve from violence. During this period, civilians in Gaza will receive urgently needed humanitarian relief and the opportunity to carry out vital functions, including burying the dead, taking care of the injured, and restocking food supplies. Overdue repairs on essential water and energy infrastructure could also continue during this period. Israeli and Palestinian delegations will immediately be going to Cairo for negotiations with the government of Egypt at the invitation of Egypt, aimed at reaching a durable ceasefire. The parties will be able to raise all issues of concern in these negotiations. We thank key regional stakeholders for their vital support of this process and count on a continued collaborative international effort to assist Egypt and the parties reach a durable ceasefire as soon as possible.
The drama of the ages that is currently taking place before our very eyes is moving us towards a tremendous climax, and the script for what is happening and will happen on the world stage is contained within the pages of God's Word, the Bible.
Behold, this was the iniquity of thy sister Sodom. Pride, fullness of bread, and abundance of idleness was in her and in her daughters. Neither did she strengthen the hand of the poor and needy. And they were haughty, and committed abomination before me. Therefore I took them away as I saw good.
We want to get straight to Buenos Aires right now, because Standard & Poor's says that Argentina defaulted on its debt for the second time in 13 years. As the country scrambles to avert a crisis, we check in with Willem, who is live from Buenos Aires in the Plaza de Mayo. Willem, you've been speaking with people all yesterday, before the announcement, after the announcement. Give us the reaction on the ground there.
Funny you're talking about Obama's reaction, calling that a political stunt. People here have been saying that there's been a few political stunts taking place at the moment. The range of opinions in Buenos Aires is quite interesting. I've got some of the local newspapers here. One consistent thing is that all of the funds in New York are referred to as vulture funds. They've really taken the government's line. It's Argentina versus these funds. A lot of local people very unhappy with the way the government's treated the US situation, but we'll see what happens in the future.
Do you sense any frustration as well, given that Argentina has defaulted several times? I believe, 13 times in since it became an independent country, 7 times, since declaring independence from Spain in 1816. Default is not exactly unfamiliar ground here.
No, I think a lot of people I've been speaking to have been saying, you know, we kind of expect this. This is happening, you know, regularly enough that this is affecting our businesses. They're pretty much fed up with the situation. I think frustration is not necessarily a strong enough word for some of the business owners, but people on the street are saying, I don't know if this is really going to affect my everyday life, but it's still quite annoying that's happening.
Yeah, as a matter of fact, we look at you on the plaza there, Buenos Aires, waking up, the lights are on. As you go to get your coffee, I mean, is anything really different on the street?
Not really. Apart from these front page headlines, there's not a lot going on here at the moment. As you can see, people are just starting to come into work.
Willem, within Argentina, what is the next step? Mr. Kilikov goes back to Buenos Aires. What does he exactly go back to with the leadership of the nation?
I'll tell you what, Tom, behind me is the Ministry of the Economy. The doors are still locked there, so he's clearly not in work here yet. I'm not quite sure what the next steps are going to be. The understanding in a lot of the local media and some of the experts I've been speaking to here is the option of dealing with private banks here, of them buying out the bondholders in the US, is the scenario that most people think is going to happen. We'll see whether that's going to be the case, but it does seem like the easiest solution for the Argentine government in terms of saving face.
Argentina teeters on the brink of its second default in 13 years as talks with bondholders collapse. Welcome to your Thursday lunch break, everyone. I'm Tanya Rivero. The setback immediately sends Argentine stocks plunging in after-hours trading, with the possibility the talks could resume and a deal could eventually be reached, fading but not altogether gone. What could the repercussions be? Here with the latest is WSJ reporter Nicole Hong. Nicole, thanks so much for joining us. Can you bring us up to speed on the latest in the talks with creditors?
So basically we're hearing a lot of different things from different sources. Some people are telling us that there are banks who are trying to find a way to pay off the creditors for Argentina and help the country get out of this mess. We're hearing from some of the creditors that they, haven't taken any of these offers seriously. So all I can say right now is that the situation is in flux, and we can tell from the reaction in the Argentine bonds and stocks today that everyone's kind of just holding their breath to see, what could come next.
And what led to this current crisis? Is it at all linked to the one 13 years ago?
It actually is, because 13 years ago, Argentina defaulted. This was in 2001. And since then, there have been creditors who have sued Argentina to get full payment. And these were the holdout creditors. And because Argentina has refused to pay them, it wasn't allowed to pay its new bondholders. And that's why it defaulted yesterday, because it didn't make the interest payment on the new bonds. So in a way, this is all sort of connected, and it's been a decade-long saga in US courts.
But it's not immediately reflective of the economy in Argentina right now, correct? Is the economy in decent shape?
So it's definitely not in crisis like it was, for the last default in 2001. But the country is in recession, right? There's really high inflation, and everyone's saying that while they're not sure what this default could mean for Argentina, it's definitely not a good thing, because it'll probably just put more pressure on an economy that's already struggling.
So let's speculate for a bit. What could this default mean? I mean, would there be another run on the banks like there was 13 years ago? And would any of this spread to the U.S.?
So a lot of that will depend how sort of prolonged this default could be. If they reach a deal tomorrow, I think this could pass pretty quickly. But if they drag this out for months or potentially even years, then that could have a pretty significant impact. And in terms of spreading to the U.S., at this point we don't see any sort of reaction in U.S. markets or even global markets, really, just because since 2001 Argentina has been such an isolated economy. They haven't been able to tap international debt markets. So it really is a very unique and kind of unprecedented case that we have here.
All right, very interesting, and we know this will continue to develop throughout the day, so we'll check back in with you, Nicole. Thanks so much for that.
Thank you.
Argentina's defaulted for the second time in 13 years. What are the implications for the world and for the country? With me to discuss this is Joseph Cotterill, a writer for Lex and Alphaville. Joe, it's a long, complicated story, but very briefly, tell us, how did we get to this situation?
Well, if history repeats itself, this isn't so much an economic crisis as in 2001 as a courtroom farce. We have to look at what Argentina has defaulted on, and it's the debt which it restructured after the first default 13 years ago. It's always been in default on the creditors who held out from that restructuring, who over the last 13 years have been trying to enforce those debts by hook or by crook in US courts 2 years ago, they won quite a big victory, and Argentina's response since then has been essentially prevaricate until it's decided to default on everyone rather than paying holdouts and restructured.
In the end, it came down to quite a big confrontation in US courts between hedge funds and the country. Could it have been averted, this default? A lot of last-minute talks went on last night.
Yeah, I mean, there were all sorts of rumours, you know, for example, that Argentine banks would come in and make a private sort of side payment to the holdouts in order to allow talks to continue. But essentially, it's really been Argentina politically does not want to pay these holdouts. It passed laws, you know, years ago to not to pay them.
Okay, so what are the implications then for Argentina now? Economic disaster for the country?
Well, actually, you have to look at the bond prices for both restructured and holdout debts, and they're quite high, and they're roughly the same. You know, about 80 cents in the dollar each, which implies that Argentina is actually going to make a settlement quite soon. I mean, you know, at stake here is having free sort of unfettered access to capital markets, which is quite important.
Which is going to be a big deal for its economy going forward.
Yeah, I mean, you know, it's devalued its currency, you know, earlier this year. You know, if it wants to avoid another one, it needs to have access to US dollar financing, and the holdouts are really the last obstacle.
Okay, all right. Let's look at the broader implications, if you like. Is this going to be a shock to financial markets globally?
Well, I mean, you know, ever since the 2001 default, really, you know, there hasn't been that much exposure in banking and finance to the Argentine sovereign for obvious reasons, because it defaults all the time.
There's no surprise.
Yes, but other sovereigns probably have to look at the legal protections in their own debt issuance to make sure that, you know, if they ever restructure in the future, holdouts won't have the same leverage.
But some of that's been taking place already, hasn't it?
Well, I mean, you have to consider, you know, Ecuador, you know, has recently issued debt, and, you know, that's another serial defaulter. And if you look at the terms there, they aren't hugely protective for creditors, and, you know, may lead to interpretation issues down the line if it defaults again. So you have to kind of constantly look at what the bond contracts say. Okay, of course, the emphasis in the sort of bond sovereign market the last few years has been Europe, but we have seen legal changes there. Have they learned perhaps from the Argentine experience? Yeah, the innovation in Europe was to introduce collective action clauses, which, you know, essentially the majority votes and then they bind the minority so that holdouts never become a problem in the first place. And I expect, you know, again, people should be sort of broadening collective action clauses. However, you know, they're not a wonder weapon for sort of solving these debt restructuring issues. The thing you have to decide on in the first place is the debt restructuring fair? You know, Argentina's in 2005 was, you know, extremely punitive. And you have to kind of look at, you know, what's reasonable.
Okay, Joe, you've watched this very closely over the years. What should we watch out for in the next weeks and months ahead? I mean, we have to look at if Argentine banks do make that sort of private deal, but also we have to think, you know, in the next few months we'll be sort of pushing towards the settlement. That's what I think bond prices are telling us. Joe, thank you very much. So lots to watch out for there in the case of Argentina and its second default in 13 years.